Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short video on the dramatic deterioration of relations between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Azerbaijan. And what makes this such an intriguing story is that, in theory, you would expect Russia and Azerbaijan to enjoy rather cordial relations. Recall that uh, during the Armenia-Azerbaijan War of 2020, which Azerbaijan won very decisively, very much to the detriment of Armenia, Russia essentially adopted a hands-off attitude. And that was very surprising because Armenia was, after all, a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, as was Russia, and of course, and Azerbaijan was not. So one would have expected Russia to step in and provide aid to Armenia. Russia did not do so. And that was in 2020. And then, of course, in 2024, Azerbaijan, following up on its victory in the 2020 war, Azerbaijan launched an ethnic cleansing campaign and rid the province of Nagorno-Karabakh of all of its Armenian residents. Maybe some 150,000 Armenians were forced to flee back into Armenia. Russia did not raise any kind of a protest about this, and then Azerbaijan followed this up with the expulsion of the Russian peacekeepers. So this was part of the deal that ended the 2020 war, was that there would be Russian peacekeepers stationed in Nagorno-Karabakh. But since the peacekeepers really did nothing at all to protect the Armenians, and after the Armenians were gone, there really wasn't much purpose to the Russian peacekeepers. So the Azerbaijanis asked them to leave, and Russia left. Now, the Armenians, of course, have been very unhappy about these developments and have blamed Russia for this major reversal in their fortunes. But one would have expected that Azerbaijan would be very happy with the way Russia has comported itself and would not really engage in any actions to the detriment of Russian interests. But in fact, the opposite has happened. It started with the shoot down or crash of an Azeri civilian airliner last December. It's not exactly clear what happened, but it seems like that this aircraft, this Azeri civilian airliner, was planning to land in Grozny in Chechnya, and it came under fire from Russian anti-aircraft weapons. That it was clear that a drone, a Ukrainian drone, maybe several Ukrainian drones, were tracking the civilian airliners. The anti-aircraft systems were targeted on the drones. And now, whether they actually directly hit the airliner or whether just the shrapnel from the impact with the drones hit the airliner. But either way, the airliner was very badly damaged. It couldn't land in Grozny. It tried to land in Kazakhstan, and of course, it crashed upon landing, and a number of passengers were killed. Russia accepted responsibility for this, but Azerbaijan made this an issue and just wouldn't accept the Russian apology, and instead continued to complain bitterly about Russia. And then now in recent days, they're still complaining about this issue with the civilian airliner, but in recent days, Azerbaijan has found other issues to complain about. First of all, the activities of Sputnik, which is, of course, owned by RT, owned in turn by Russia-Azerbaijan. They're basically they have tried to prevent the activities of Sputnik in Azerbaijan, denying them accreditation. And then recently, they stormed the offices of Sputnik and arrested journalists there. And then there's also been a case in Russia in which the Russian authorities arrested members of an Azeri criminal gang. And one has to say, the Azeris are notorious in their mafia organizations. I mean, they control an awful lot of criminal activities, the usual drugs, prostitution, and all the rest. But nonetheless, the Russian authorities were investigating the activities of an Azeri criminal gang, and in particular, some murders that actually took place some years ago. There was mass arrests, and a couple of these Azeris were killed during the arrest. And now, the authorities in Azerbaijan are absolutely infuriated about this, and then, of course, they in turn, the Azeri authorities have rounded up a whole bunch of Russians who clearly are not members of any gang. These were Russians who actually had fled Russia. They didn't like the Russian government. They'd fled to Azerbaijan, but nonetheless, they're now charged with being members of a criminal gang. So it's becoming a very interesting to speculate as to where all of this is going. So let's first of all take a look at some of the coverage in the media of these recent events, and then we can speculate as to what's really behind this dramatic deterioration in relations. So here is the story in the BBC, and it starts off with this discussion about the arrest of this members of this criminal Azeri gang, and two people dying following these arrests. So it says there, two deaths in Russian custody spark a rift with former ally Azerbaijan. The deaths of two brothers in Russian custody have laid bare a diplomatic rift with Azerbaijan as it challenges Moscow's dominant role in the South Caucasus and establish itself as a regional power. And I think that's right as a way of framing this story, that one has to say what's really happening here is a decline in Russia's presence and influence in the Caucasus. Remember, the Caucasus used to be Russia's backyard. Nothing could happen between Armenia and Azerbaijan without Russian say-so. But really, ever since the 2020 war, which Azerbaijan launched, and Russia seemed unable to do anything about it, and then the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, which again, Russia seemed unable to do anything about it, it's a reflection. And then, of course, Armenia withdrawing from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, again, without Russia being able to do anything about it, it's a reflection of how much Russian influence has declined in the Caucasus. And Azerbaijan is clearly on the rise. However, as we'll see, Azerbaijan is playing a very dangerous game here, because it's not, though it's undoubtedly has oil and gas riches, which is fueling its rising power and its ability to dispatch Armenia with ease, Azerbaijan is still a small country. And to its north and to its south are two powerful states with whom Azerbaijan now seems to be cultivating very bad relations. So the north, obviously, is Russia, but to the south is Iran. And as we'll see, relations between Azerbaijan and Iran are also deteriorating drastically. Both Russia and Iran are much bigger and much stronger than Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan, it's one thing to deal with Armenia, which is a very small country. You've bitten off more than you can chew if you go down the path of waging wars on two fronts. Anyway, it goes on here. Both Azerbaijani men showed signs of trauma. And then it says Azerbaijani authorities have already arrested two Russian state media employees, accusing them of being FSB agents. And then tensions were already high between the two neighbors. And then it says last December, 38 people died when an Azerbaijani Airlines plane was shot down, apparently by Russian anti-aircraft missile fired by mistake. And then the latest spat began last Friday when Russian police operation in the city of Yekaterinburg targeted suspects as part of a cold case murder inquiries dating back to 2001. But the BBC, of course, doesn't go into the really crucial question here, which is that Russia is in the grip of serious crime wave, many of which are centered on a variety of ethnic groups. Immigration into Russia has been rising in recent years, certainly driven by the war, driven by the shortage of labor, but it's bringing with it serious social problems. We have the Azerbaijani criminal gangs, but we also have the Tajik criminal gangs. And clearly, there is growing pressure inside Russia for the authorities to crack down on this criminal activity. The Russians throughout, at every level, complain about this growing crime wave. Anyways, there's two of the suspects, Azerbaijani-born brothers, blah, blah, Ziadin and Hussein Safarov, died in custody. Several others were taken to hospital. And then the Azerbaijani prosecutor general has now launched a criminal case accusing Russian police of torturing and deliberately killing the brothers. A post-mortem conducted in Azerbaijan found they died from post-traumatic shock after being severely beaten in custody. The story isn't very clear. The bodies have been shipped back to Azerbaijan. So this post-mortem was conducted in Azerbaijan after Russia had shipped the bodies to Azerbaijan. And then Russia's law enforcement says one of the men died of a heart attack, and the cause of the second death has not been confirmed. One has to say here that in doing this, the Russians are asking for trouble, much as they were asking for trouble when they whenever they allow other countries to conduct their investigations and their medical autopsies. And of course, lo and behold, whenever they do that, they are going to find that the Russians behaved reprehensibly, and that this was not a heart attack or whatever. No, this was clearly Russian brute force that caused the death of these people. So this is always going to happen. And I mean, remember this happened with Navalny. Navalny got sick. He was flown into Germany, and of course, Germany immediately declared, yes, he had been poisoned. The common sense would suggest that, well, if he had been poisoned, why would the Russians allow him to be flown into Germany? But that didn't really matter. But it became obvious that the media were going to run with the story. Oh, the Russian authorities have poisoned Navalny. Well, Yeah, if the Germans are going to handle the autopsy, that's what they're going to determine. So it's the same in this case. Once they ship these bodies to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan we're going to say, no, 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 we absolutely reject the finding that this person died of a heart attack. In response, Baku canceled an upcoming visit by Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk, as well as shows involving Russian artists. Azerbaijani media outlets with ties to government have criticized Putin, saying his rule is even more brutal than that of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. It's not just Azerbaijani media, it's Azerbaijani state media. So it's state media in Azerbaijan that are claiming that he's even worse than Stalin. And then says, when Azerbaijani Airlines plane went down last December, Putin offered an apology, but that failed to satisfy Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev. Aliyev demanded a full admission of responsibility and a comprehensive investigation. That triggered a propaganda war with Baku, accusing Russian cultural organizations of espionage and demanding the closure of the Baku office of Russian state media outlet Sputnik. So, and this is what happened. This happened in February. So in December, the plane went down, and then in February, um, the Azerbaijan authorities withdrew their accreditation to Sputnik. Sputnik remained operational until this week, when Azerbaijani police raided its Baku bureau and detained 2 employees, and then Igor Kartavych and Yevgeny Belousov. Authorities allege both are affiliated with the Russian security service, the FSB. Russia denies this, saying the arrests are unjust. And then here is Euronews, of course, is what you would expect. It says Azerbaijan jails Sputnik executives amid escalating tensions with Russia. And then it says executive director and editor-in-chief of Russia's state-run news agency Sputnik in Azerbaijan have been issued 4 months of detention on Tuesday following a Baku police raid of the Russian state media affiliate. And then it says, according to the authorities, they are being held on counts of fraud, illegal entrepreneurship, and legalization of property obtained by criminal means. And then this Azeri news agency reported earlier that the 2 employees of the FSB were among 7 people detained after the raid on the offices of Sputnik Azerbaijan, and then owned by Russia Сегодня, which is in turn owned by the Russian government. And then another Russian state-run media outlet, Rupture, later reported that one of its editors had been detained after attempting to film the police action at the Sputnik offices in Baku. And then says the tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia escalated over the past few days following the detention of over 50 Azerbaijanis in Yekaterinburg. One has to be very wary of these numbers that are being thrown around because you read your news story and it takes your choice. They're throwing out very different numbers about how many were detained in these raids. 2 people, the brothers Safarov, died during the raids, and 3 others were seriously injured. And then it's all part of a murder investigation in the early 2000s. And then it goes on. Some detainees have alleged that confessions were obtained through force, threats, and coercion, including pressure on family members. Forensic experts have revealed that the Azerbaijani citizens killed during the Russian raids in Yekaterinburg died from blunt force trauma, not gunshot wounds, raising additional question about the circumstance of the death. It's very murky as to whether they are indeed Azerbaijani citizens rather than they are of Azerbaijani origin. Their national origin is Azerbaijani, but they're in fact Russian citizens. So that's left a little bit vague. But either way, the Azerbaijan authorities are claiming these people as their own, whether they're actually citizens of Russia or Azerbaijan. And then the Azerbaijan Foreign Ministry condemned the operation as brutal and unjustified and called on the Russian authorities to conduct an urgent investigation into the matter and bring the perpetrators of this unacceptable violence to justice as soon as possible. And then, in addition, Azerbaijan summoned Russia's envoy to Baku to protest against the deadly raids and also canceled all cultural events planned by the Russian state and private institution in protest against the raids in Yekaterinburg. Now, this is all quite intense reaction. And remember, these are criminal gangs. This is an internal Russian matter. It's not like Russia has sent its forces into Azerbaijan and arrested people in Azerbaijan. This is an internal matter. It's part of an ongoing criminal investigation in Russia. Says it's going back many years, and the Azerbaijan government knows perfectly well, as everybody knows perfectly well, that Azerbaijan is notorious, or the Azeris are notorious for running mafia like operations inside Russia, in other places as well, and that yeah, this is the kind of thing the law enforcement authorities would be engaged in. But instead, they've made this into this huge issue, as if this has anything to do with Azerbaijan, and thus they're claiming, without really any evidence, but they don't need any evidence, they're claiming that this is driven by Russian racism, Russian ethnic animus toward the Azeris. So remember, the relations between Russia and Azerbaijan were supposed to be cordial. That's why I started this podcast by pointing out that the Azeris were very, very happy by the fact that Russia took a hands-off attitude to the war with Armenia in 2020 and then to the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh last year. So now they're accusing Russia of some sort of ethnic animus towards Azeris. In response to targeted and extrajudicial killings and acts of violence against Azerbaijanis based on their ethnicities, demonstratively perpetrated by Russian law enforcement agencies in the Yekaterinburg region of the Russian Federation, and considering the systematic nature of such incidents in recent times, all cultural events planned in Azerbaijan involving Russian state and private entities have been cancelled, said the Azerbaijani Ministry of Culture. So this is a very strong statement. Extrajudicial killings and acts of violence against Azerbaijanis based on their ethnicity. Very, very strong words without any evidence. And so they canceled all of these cultural events. And then in February, the Azerbaijani government shut down Russia's state-funded news agency, Sputnik, but it has continued to operate, albeit with a reduced staff. Although the agency's accreditation was officially revoked in February, the Azerbaijan Interior Ministry stated that its data indicated Sputnik Azerbaijan allegedly continued its activities using illegal funding sources. The director of Sputnik's parent company, Russia Сегодня, Dmitry Kiselev, and usual Euronews, one of the most prominent Russian propagandists who regularly makes open calls to destroy Ukraine and attack Europe with Russian missiles. Notice he's a propagandist, but everything that the Azerbaijan authorities have been alleging, they're not propagandists. Said Sputnik and Azerbaijani officials have been trying to find a temporary agreement allowing it to keep working in Baku. And then Russian authorities denounced the state-run Sputnik office raid and detention as unfriendly acts by Baku and the illegal arrest of Russian journalists. In additional developments on Tuesday, Azerbaijan's Interior Ministry announced that it dismantled two criminal groups in Baku, detaining Russian nationals suspected of trafficking drugs from Iran and conducting cyber fraud operations. Now, this is as likely a story, as unlikely a story as you'll ever find. Trafficking drugs from Iran? I don't think so. I mean, you're involved in drug trafficking in Iran, you get sentenced to death. That's you know way too risky for anyone to be engaged in that. And as we'll see, these people who have been arrested, these are not hardened criminals and hardened masterminds who would dare to do anything as insane as to traffic drugs from Iran. And then here is BNE Intel News, specializing in news from the Caucasus. It says Azerbaijan arrests 8 Russians as diplomatic crisis deepens over Yekaterinburg killings. Azerbaijan has arrested 8 Russian citizens on drug trafficking and cybercrime charges, whilst delivering a formal diplomatic protest over the Yekaterinburg killings as the ongoing crisis escalates into the most serious confrontation in Baku and Moscow since independence. The crisis was triggered by the killings of 2 Azerbaijani brothers, and then the deaths of these brothers prompted a strong diplomatic response from Baku, and then including the arrests of several journalists. And then it goes on. Russian authorities maintain that the Yekaterinburg operation targeted an ethnic criminal organization active since the late 1990s, although they have not explained why lethal force was necessary for historical cases or addressed torture allegations. Well, we don't know what really happened, but it's not unusual in many parts of the world that arrests lead to some very nasty consequences. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but this ended so badly, at least for these 2 brothers, is is something that happens in the United States, happens in other countries, and it's not necessarily proof of ethnic animus, racism, or anything like that. The latest arrest on July the 1st targeted alleged members of 2 organized criminal groups suspected of narcotics transit from Iran, online trafficking of prohibited substances, and cybercrime. And then in courtroom photographs, several suspects appeared with visible bruises and swollen faces. One had a bloodied head wound. But apparently that's not to do with racism or ethnic animus or anything like that. So you just say, oh, well, in courtroom photographs, these Russian suspects appeared with visible bruises and swollen faces. One had a bloodied head wound. And then he goes on. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan's foreign ministry delivered a note verbale of protest to Russia over the murder and injury of our compatriots in Yekaterinburg. And then during a meeting where Ambassador Rahman Mustafayev was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Azerbaijan's protest note expressed firm protest against the use of torture and degrading treatment by Russian law enforcement agencies during interrogation of our compatriots. So again, this odd use of the word compatriots. Are they really citizens of Azerbaijan, or are they citizens of Russia? The note stated that these actions violated legal norms of the Russian Federation and internationally recognized fundamental human rights and freedoms. It demanded that Russia conduct a thorough and objective investigation of these attacks and take urgent measures to prosecute perpetrators. And then the diplomatic confrontation intensified when Russia protested Azerbaijan's arrest of the Sputnik journalist, and then it was they basically they're justifying this person, the foreign ministry spokesperson Ayikhan Hajizada, who then says that unlike Russian actions, Azerbaijan's measures were completely legal and called for non-interference in the internal affairs of Azerbaijan. So this is arrest of journalists. It was stated that said activities and actions carried out by Russia contradict the bilateral relations between the two countries. And then it goes on about this Russian journalist. Azerbaijan arrested these journalists on June the 30th and ordered fresh autopsies on the two Azerbaijani brothers killed in Yekaterinburg. And then it says FSB forces killed the brothers. They're just saying it's FSB. It's not clear to me that it was the FSB, but okay. Killed the two brothers and arrested 9 others during the violent raid. So again, they're now 9. These numbers seem to change from news story to news story. So they killed the brothers and arrested 9 others. Some of these stories that talk about 50 people were arrested. They said and arrested 9 others. The raids triggered a strong diplomatic response, and then the bodies of the brothers arrived in Azerbaijan on June the 30th and were handed over to relatives. The victims will undergo new medical examinations before burial. Hours after the bodies' return, Azerbaijan's Interior Ministry conducted operations at Sputnik Azerbaijan's Baku office, arresting the executive director and chief editor. And here they said the Russian state media outlets' operation was suspended in February 2025. Those staff continued working illegally. And then the Interior Ministry said investigations began based on operational intelligence, that the agency continued activities through illegal financing despite accreditation suspension. But it was clear what activities, I presume the only activities they were engaged in was journalism. I mean, what else? On June the 30th, search operations were conducted at the branch office, and there are detainees. And then Russia immediately summoned Azerbaijan's ambassador, Rahman Mustafayev, over what Moscow termed unfriendly actions and illegal detention of Russian journalists. And then Zakharova expressed concern that Russian diplomats in Baku could not contact the journalists for several hours and were denied consular access. And then the detainees are Russian citizens of Azerbaijani origin. So that's the position of the Russian government. It says they are Russian citizens. They're not citizens of Azerbaijan. They're of Azerbaijani origin. They're ethnically or nationally, they're from Azerbaijan, but they are Russian citizens. So this is an internal Russian matter that Azerbaijan has chosen to pick a fight over. They were arrested as part of an investigation into serious crimes committed in previous years. And then European Union ambassador to Azerbaijan. All right, so read this carefully. European Union ambassador to Azerbaijan, Peter Michalko, became the first senior Western diplomat to condemn the Yekaterinburg killings. Notice that they're already saying they're killings. We don't know at all that they're killings. They died during the arrest, but we don't know the circumstances in which they died. But they're already saying they're killings. The European Union ambassador to Azerbaijan, already intervenes and says, I'm deeply concerned by reports of violence, torture, and inhuman treatment by Russian security forces against ethnic Azerbaijanis, even resulting in deaths. My thoughts are with the victims and their families. So when you get this, and I should also mention here that Zelensky has also weighed in, expressing his support and for Azerbaijan, his concern and solicitude for Azerbaijan in this confrontation. It smacks very much of a staged operation. Why would the EU ambassador to Azerbaijan feel the need to weigh in on something that is an internal policing matter? This is an internal policing matter that's going on in Russia over crimes committed. Well, they were committed. The murder that's being investigated was committed some years ago, but this is an ongoing criminal activities from this ethnic Azerbaijani mafia. And then Russian authorities provided their first detailed justification for the FSB operation, claiming the Safarov brothers led an ethnic criminal organization active since the late 1990s. TASS quoted law enforcement sources alleging the group engaged in illegal activities, selling drugs, alcoholic and tobacco products, gambling, supervising prostitution, and distributing pornographic materials. The sources claimed one victim was an entrepreneur who refused to pay protection money and was murdered by the group. They also suggested possible links to mass alcohol poisoning in Yekaterinburg in 2021 and ownership of kiosks selling counterfeit goods. Okay, so that's a description of what the allegations are. We don't know how true this is. Nonetheless, it seems at least that on the face of it to be a bona fide criminal investigation. How these two people died, what the circumstances were, obviously, we don't know. The authorities in Baku are already proclaiming that they know what happened, but we basically don't know. And the EU and Zelensky also apparently know exactly what happened. Now, this, here, as we've seen through these stories, is an indication that that Azerbaijan is deliberately fueling a confrontation with Russia. This goes back to December and the refusal to accept an apology from Russia over the downing of that civilian airliner, because even Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, didn't accuse Russia of deliberately targeting the civilian airliner. So, just basically it was a, one of these cock-ups that happen in war. You're targeting a missile or you're targeting a drone, and if the drone happens to be tracking a civilian airliner, then the civilian airliner gets hit. And this, of course, happened with a Russian airliner in Syria, where again the Syrian authorities were trying to hit an Israeli aircraft. The Israeli aircraft was tracking the Russian aircraft, and of course it resulted in the Russian aircraft getting shot down. So these things happen, but Azerbaijan has chosen to make this into a whole issue. Clearly, this is being done, orchestrated by the EU. The fact that the EU has already weighed in, the fact that Zelensky has weighed in, that this is being carefully put together. But there are other aspects to this issue with Azerbaijan. Clearly, having defeated Armenia in its war, defeated Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh, the next step in this, steady demolition of Armenia is to create the Zangezur corridor, whereby Azerbaijan proper will be linked to Nakhchivan. It's the ex-Lake Nakhchivan, and thereby a transport corridor will be created for Azerbaijan, but more important, a transport corridor will be created for Turkey. And this is part of the Turkish plan to link Azerbaijan as a kind of as a commerce route and then on into Central Asia. This is part of the whole ambitious plan of Erdogan, this organization of Turkic states. And the key here is creating this transport hub through Armenia. Armenia is not very happy about this because it essentially slices the country into two. But since no one's really going to come to Armenia's assistance, it really has, at this stage, little choice but to cave to the demands of Turkey and Azerbaijan. And the other thing that Azerbaijan is doing in alliance with Turkey is supporting Israel. The Turkey, I mean, Azerbaijan provides for most of Israel's oil and gas imports. That's coming from Azerbaijan. So it's an enormously important energy exporter to Israel. And in return, Israel provides drones and weapons and ammunition to Azerbaijan, and of course provides intelligence to Azerbaijan. More seriously, and this is why Azerbaijan is playing a dangerous game here. More seriously, Azerbaijan is working hand in glove with Israel against Iran. And there's clear evidence that some of the attacks on Iran during its recent war with Israel emanated from Azerbaijan. And this means that Azerbaijan is coming into some confrontation with Iran. So this is part of this great ambition of becoming this key country in the Caucasus, part of this alliance with Turkey, but becomes a major player among the organization of Turkic states. But it also means that it's getting into a serious confrontation with Iran. And here is a story from Radio Free Europe, which says Iran seeks probe into possible Israeli use of Azerbaijani airspace during war. Now, this has been reported elsewhere, not extensively, but has been reported elsewhere that Iran came under attack via Azerbaijan. And it says Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has called for an investigation into whether Azerbaijan's airspace was used by Israeli drones as they flew missions to attack Iran during their recent conflict. Pezeshkian urged Azerbaijan's President Aliyev during a call on June 26 to investigate and verify reports that Israeli drones, including micro drones, may have entered Iranian airspace via Azerbaijani territory. According to the official Iranian readout of the conversation, Aliyev denied the claims and insisted that his government would not allow Azerbaijan's territory to be used against Iran. On the same day, Israeli media cited an unnamed defense official as saying that Israeli defense forces had been operating in a country close to Iran during the war without offering further details. Azerbaijan's deepening ties with Israel have long been a source of unease in Tehran. The relationship has grown closer in recent years, marked by significant defense cooperation and the opening of the Azerbaijani embassy in Tel Aviv in 2023, moves that Iranian officials view with increasing suspicion. This is, of course, very important because not only is Azerbaijan a key energy hub for Israel, it allows Israel to wage its wars in Gaza and allows it to wage its war against Iran. But it's also one of the few Muslim majority countries in the world that does recognize Israel. Remember, most Muslim countries, not all, but most Muslim countries do not recognize the state of Israel. You know, Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they do not recognize Israel. Azerbaijan is one of the few that does. So, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Israel-made weapons constitute approximately 69% of all major conventional arms imported by Azerbaijan between 2016 and 2020. So that's 69% of all major conventional arms imported by Azerbaijan. So this was the arms that we used in the war against Armenia. And then and so you can see here that Azerbaijan, which was clearly decided to go down this path of a confrontation with Russia, maybe opening up a new front against Russia. You know, we already have a variety of fronts, you know, like as in Moldova, as in the Baltic Sea. It sounds like there's another one now that's developing in Azerbaijan. The one fly in the ointment, as we've seen, the fly in the ointment for Azerbaijan is that it's a small country and it may have just bitten off more than it can chew. Admittedly, Iran has its own problems right now, but if Azerbaijan and Turkey do go down this path of this creation of the Zangezur corridor, and Iran will have something to say about that, because then I think essentially Iran will be encircled by its enemies, and it's not going to appreciate that. So that could be a serious crisis down the road. Anyway, wanted to just give you this update on this quite dramatic deterioration of relations by two countries that had hitherto enjoyed cordial relations. And it's a reflection of just how much politics in the Caucasus has changed really in recent years. There's no comparison with the way things were in the 80s and 90s when Russian writ ran large. It was Russia's backyard. Everything depended on Russia, no longer. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.